Every now and then, you hear about a drug being pulled off the market because of serious, unforeseen side effects. After millions of dollars invested in development and clinical trials, the drug's promise is dashed. And often, it's because a drug maker didn't test the drug enough on women.
What they have seen over time is a profound impact on their bottom line. 8 of 10 drugs in a report from the General Accounting Office that have been pulled from the after FDA approval in post-marketing surveillance was because of adverse events in women.
That's Dr. Teresa Woodruff, director of the Women's Health Research Institute at Northwestern University.
Just last year, there was the very notable case on Ambien, which is a well-known sleep aid. It's been on the market for 20 years. And it was pulled because of adverse events affecting women. So for a man who took the drug at 11 o'clock at night, it was cleared largely by 6 o'clock the next morning. For a woman who took the drug at 11 o'clock at night, it didn't clear her system until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock the next morning. So the adverse events were that women would still get up, but they would be sleepy and under the influence of the effects of Ambien. But if, again, we go back to that FDA filing where they showed that there was a difference in the clearance of the drugs for males and females, in that same FDA filing, they said, but we don't know the efficacy in females. And that's because they didn't test efficacy in females.
Ambien is back on the market now with labeling that instructs women to take half the dose for men. Dr. Melina Kibbe, professor of surgery at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, says it's the first time a drug has been labeled with different dosing for men and women.
Now, if this happens for Ambien, you have to ask yourself how many other drugs out there should have different dosing based on sex. So I would say many. And this is where the FDA really needs to get involved. I would recommend that the FDA have much stricter requirements requiring equal enrollment of males and females in human clinical research, reporting the data by sex, and analyzing the data by sex. We're not there yet.
In fact, only about a third of clinical trial participants are women. Still, that's better than it used to be. But Kibbe says equal enrollment isn't enough. It makes no difference if the results are lumped together without an eye on differences in response.
It's one thing to include men and women in a clinical trial, but then the problem is you include both sexes, but you report the data in aggregate, then you won't know if a drug had, say, a better effect in men versus women. So it's really important to report the data, yes, as aggregate, but also to do sex-based reporting of the data to show the effect in men versus women and to analyze the data statistically by sex. That's where we currently have a problem.
But that's not the only one. If we're considering a lack of representation of females as research subjects, Woodruff says we have to go back a lot earlier in the process than clinical trials.
There's been a lack of inclusion of females in basic science. So what that means is that the sex of animals in our basic science research, again, funded by the federal government through the National Institutes of Health, have not had that kind of attention.
So even though clinical trials may include more females as study subjects, much of the work that goes on before that doesn't. Dr. Catherine Sandberg is professor, vice chair of research, and director of the Center for the Study of Sex Differences in Health, Aging, and Disease at Georgetown University. She's also chaired a panel advising the National Institutes of Health on the issue.
If you're thinking about the pipeline for new therapeutics, new drugs, new treatment paradigms, if you're thinking about this pipeline, it all starts with preclinical research. So that's investigators like myself who work in a laboratory on animal models of disease or cellular models of disease. This is where we get our hints about what would be a good drug target. What most basic scientists have been doing in the past is using the male animal in models of disease, male animal models, or cells from these animals. And that has biased the whole pipeline for drug discovery toward what's optimal for the male.
Up until recently, there's been absolutely no guidelines at all or requirements really requiring investigators to study novel therapies on male and female cells in male and female animals. So the majority of therapies that are developed from its infancy are pretty much tested on male cells or male animals. So by the time it makes it to the human studies, we know that it works very well in males, but we have no idea in female cells and female animals. So this represents a problem for clinical trials because at the most expensive end of the spectrum, human clinical trial is oftentimes the first time it's being evaluated in females.
Now, you might expect that there would be differences in animals between males and females. But a lot of basic scientific research is done on cells, skin cells, heart muscle cells, kidney cells, and so on. You might not think there's much difference between the male and female versions of those, but Woodruff says, think again.
What we're talking about fundamentally are the sex chromosomes, XX and XY. And that imprint of the chromosomal sex can have profound effects right at the cellular level. So we have hormonal effects, but we also have sex chromosome effects. And it's really important that as a biomedical community, we appreciate that that's strong biology. We're really talking about precision medicine or personalized medicine and the rise of genomic medicine. And the biggest difference between the genomes is the X and Y chromosome content. So this is something that I think once the biomedical community really understands, they're going to jump on this as a new opportunity for innovative new science, for paradigm-shifting new mechanisms and concepts that then, I believe, is going to lead to a stronger, better pipeline of new research concepts that ultimately will become tomorrow's therapeutics or ways to counteract disease.
However, Kibbe says researchers have a long way to go before they include female models in equal numbers, or often even consider whether they do or not. Studies normally go to great lengths to describe the details of experiments, how long they took, the temperature that cells were maintained at, and so on. But Kibbe's review of animal and cell studies in 5 surgical journals shows that some information is routinely missing.
The first thing that shocked me in analyzing all these manuscripts was that a third of the manuscripts didn't even state the sex studied. That surprised me. I didn't expect to find that going into this. And then when you actually look at the papers that reported the sex, when using animals, 80% study only males. And when looking at cells, same thing. It's about 70% study only males. So it's really a significant problem. And then I'll add the other thing we did is we asked the question of whether or not this practice of studying mostly males was getting better or worse over time. And again, an unexpected finding. We've actually gotten worse over time. Because in 1991, about 65% of the papers studied only males. 2001, 72%. In 2011, we're up to 85%. So it's consistently gotten worse every decade.
But why? Why do researchers routinely ignore female animals and cells? Sandberg says researchers fall victim to myths just like the rest of us.
They are making the assumption that there's no difference. That if we figure out the mechanism in the male, then we figure out a good drug target, that it will be also good for the woman. The second reason is that scientists had made this assumption, which is a myth. It's not true. And the assumption was that if you're going to study females, you are going to have a lot more variability in your studies because females have hormonal cycles. So this will mean that you will have to add a lot more animal groups if you want to study females. So scientists have made the decision, I don't want to have so many animal groups. It's going to be much more expensive and much more time consuming to study. So I'll just study males, I'll learn the important things, and then apply it to females.
Sandberg says many scientists accept that without question. But research has proven it's not true.
If you're measuring that variability in the male and you compare it to the amount of variability in the female, you'll find that for most parameters, most of these parameters you're interested in, there's more variability in the male than the female. So this whole idea that you have to control for the hormonal cycle in your science is not true, but it's been a myth that scientists have believed for a long time.
Finally, scientists are doing something about the situation. Some major scientific journals have begun requiring that researchers spell out the sex of a study's subjects. And starting next year, a new policy at the National Institutes of Health will affect applications for funding of research on animals and cells.
In January, you're going to have to, in your grant application, explain why you've chosen the sex of the animals or cells that you are going to study. And what's the reason behind it? And if you are only going to study males, you have to have a pretty good explanation. Otherwise, the peer review process will harm you, and you will not be as competitive, and so you will not get funded.
However, those rules don't affect all research. Privately funded studies, such as those done by drug makers, aren't covered.
Pharmaceutical companies are not required to use females and males in equal numbers or to study the differences or to really assess sex as one of the variables. My hope is that with this attention on NIH federal funding, our pharma colleagues are also going to begin to look at sex as a real opportunity for, in their case, increasing their bottom line. If they have drugs that have failed because maybe it didn't work in half the population, if they now can tailor those drugs for males or females, that's in the end going to be good for their bottom line.
So yes, while Woodruff certainly sees the current situation as a problem, it could end up being even more of an opportunity.
We're really standing on the precipice of a revolution in biomedical science. Since there has been such a paucity, such an absence of females as test subjects or the sex chromosomes of cells being studied, once the doors are really open to this whole new area, really increasing the kind of science that can be learned, we're going to learn so much more. It's going to revolutionize, I believe, basic science. And in the end, that is going to move forward into better clinical trials because we're going to have better drugs that are going to be tailored to individuals. So I see in the next 10 years a real change in the way we are experiencing health because science is going to lead the way towards a better appreciation of our own biology.
You can find out more about all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.net, where you can also find archives of our programs. You can also find them on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Reed Pence.
Get your Plenty card at Exxon or Mobil and start earning points at lots of places.
So I get points for filling up at Exxon?
You sure do.
What about getting coffee at Mobil?
Points.
Streaming TV shows on Hulu?
Definitely.
Points on my AT&T wireless bill?
Yep.
Buying soap?
At Rite Aid.
Buying you a birthday present?
Points at Macy's.
Visiting your parents?
No. You get marriage points.
Oh.
Exxon and Mobil are the only fuel brands that are part of Plenty, the rewards program that lets you earn points at one place and use them at another. Join Plenty for free through a participating Exxon or Mobil station today. Terms and limitations apply. See plenty.com/partners for details.